Hi, and welcome to Academic Compliance Academy of Anti-Money Laundering. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the Supra National Risk Assessment, or the SNRA. So what is it? Well, if we look at the chain of risk assessment going from FATF at international level, then the EU for the regional level, member states, and the operational level by the financial industry or obliged entities, all of these parties make risk assessment to some extent and share knowledge across this chain to try to optimize their resource allocation in the combating of money laundering, and of course to try to be effective in their combating of money laundering. So when we talk about the supranational risk assessment, this is a risk assessment conducted at the EU level by the Commission, hence supranational. So let's look into the requirements. I took in Article 7 from the AMLD 6 proposal, and I do know it hasn't come through yet, but let's just look at it. So, Article 7, the supranational risk assessment, the Commission shall conduct an assessment of the money laundering risk and terrorist financing affecting the internal market. So keep in mind here, the internal market. So this is an assessment of the internal market in the EU. And of course, cross-border activities within the internal market. What this report needs to have is that it needs to draw up some identification, analysis, and an evaluation of those risks at union level. Again, going back to the model, seeing that we have FATF, then we have the union or the regional level of the EU, then member state and back. So they're conducting an analysis at union level, not at member state level. So they will have to do this every 4th year. And you might question that to say, is that often enough? Because some of the information might be outdated, but there's a lot of work in this process. So we will have to settle for every 4th year, even though maybe a biannual would have been preferable. So the report has to cover at least the areas and sectors of the internal market that are exposed to money laundering and terrorist financing risk. So what we expect from an SNRA is that we see reports on different sectors, and these are kind of ranged, and there's an analysis of the inherent risk in these sectors for money laundering. And so we see an analysis that is there to help member states and the operational parties, the obliged entities within the AML regulation, to get a grasp of what is happening inside the internal market at union level, to try to understand the risk picture at this level. So the report also have to contain the nature and level of the risk associated with each area and sector. Again, highlighting the risk, informing, imagine that you're looking at the union from above and looking at the risk picture. So this is the exemplification, this is the information that you want to give on to your member states and also up to FATF, trying to elaborate and share knowledge of what are the effects that you see. Last but not least, they also have to share which means they can see that are being used for these illicit proceeds, including where they're from, can we see transaction patterns between certain member states or third countries. And there are much more requirements to this SNRA, but they're not that related necessarily to money laundering. On top of this, they also have to give recommendation to member states on which measures would be suitable to address or mitigate these identified risks. So overall, the SNRA is kind of a status quo and an explanation of what is happening at union level to try to give forth knowledge to member state level and to the operational side, including also FATF on top. So What we have seen is a focus on the later SNRNs, mostly on the ex post, that it has been written ex post to the risk. So it is more experience based than looking forward, writing it as an ex ante risk assessment. We can see some tendencies going that way, and it is the future, because we need to try to grasp onto, can we see some things happening right now, especially when it's only coming out every 4th year. We need to build up these resources more in advance and have a more ex ante look to this risk. But we can see that it happens more and more, also at member state level, so that is a positive sign. So overall, just remember that the SNRA is the risk assessment conducted at EU level by the Commission of whatever money laundering risk there is within the internal market, how it is structured, which means are being used, and can we see some patterns, similarities. Then we need, of course, to share this information with the member state and the obliged entities that may not be aware of these patterns, because they have another area and another view on how transactions are being conducted. So this was just a short video on the SNRA. So stay tuned, subscribe to this channel, and let's talk much more about money laundering.